The dust settled around the trading post like a shroud as the sun bled crimson across the Arizona territory. Sarah Running Wolf stood at the edge of the wooden porch, her weathered hands gripping the rail so tightly her knuckles showed white beneath her bronze skin. At 43, she carried herself with the bearing of Apache royalty, though the weight of 2 decades among the white settlers had carved lines of weariness around her dark eyes. Tonight would be her last night in Redemption Creek. Tomorrow, she would return to the reservation, to a people who might no longer recognize the woman she had become, to a life that felt as foreign as the one she was leaving behind. "You sure about this, Sarah?" The voice belonged to Tom Henderson, the trading post owner who had been more father than employer to her since she'd arrived 20 years ago, pregnant and desperate, fleeing the aftermath of Geronimo's final campaign. She turned to face the graying man whose kindness had been her anchor in a world that saw her as little more than a curiosity. "The decision is made, Tom. The reservation agent came through last week. They're requiring all Apache to return. The old ways are dying, but maybe there's still something there for me." Tom nodded, understanding more than most the impossible position she occupied between two worlds. Neither fully Apache nor fully accepted by the white community, Sarah had carved out a life through sheer determination and an intelligence that had impressed even the most stubborn settlers. The screen door creaked behind them, and Jack Morrison stepped onto the porch. 6 feet of lean muscle and sun-darkened skin, the cowboy had been circling Sarah's orbit for the better part of 3 years, ever since he'd drifted into Redemption Creek with nothing but a horse, a worn saddle, and secrets he kept locked behind green eyes that had seen too much. "Heard you're pulling out tomorrow," Jack said, his voice carrying that familiar mixture of respect and something deeper that Sarah had been pretending not to notice. "News travels fast in a small town." Sarah's response was carefully neutral, but Tom caught the slight tremor in her voice. Jack moved to the rail beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Seems like running to me." The words hung in the evening air like a challenge. Sarah's back stiffened, and Tom quietly excused himself, recognizing the moment for what it was. "Running?" Sarah's voice carried the edge of a blade. "I've never run from anything in my life, cowboy. I survived the cavalry when they burned our village. I survived the march to San Carlos. I survived bringing a child into a world that wanted us dead. I survived losing that child to smallpox when the government wouldn't provide medicine to hostiles. I survived building a life from nothing when everything I knew was ashes. Don't you dare call that running." Jack absorbed the fury of her words without flinching. He'd suspected there was more to Sarah's story than what the townspeople knew, but hearing the raw pain in her voice confirmed what he'd only glimpsed in unguarded moments. "You're right," he said quietly. "What you did wasn't running. It was surviving. But what you're doing now, that's something else." Sarah turned to face him fully, her dark eyes flashing with anger and something else he couldn't quite identify. "And what would you know about it? You drift from place to place like tumbleweeds, never staying long enough to put down roots, never committing to anything or anyone." "At least I'm trying to find where I belong." The accusation hit its mark. Jack's jaw tightened, and, for a moment, Sarah thought he would walk away as he had from so many other confrontations over the years. Instead, he surprised her. "You want to know about running? I'll tell you about running." His voice was low, barely audible above the evening breeze. "I was 16 when the war ended. Rode with Quantrill's raiders for 2 years, telling myself I was fighting for something that mattered. Truth was, I was just a kid who liked the violence, who found it easier to kill than to think about what killing meant." Sarah's anger began to ebb as she heard something in his voice she'd never heard before, complete, devastating honesty. "After Appomattox, when there was no more war to hide behind, I had to face what I'd become. A killer. Nothing more, nothing less. So I ran. Been running for 15 years, telling myself I was looking for something when really I was just trying to stay ahead of the man I used to be." The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked, her voice softer now. Jack turned to look at her, and, in the fading light, his face seemed younger somehow, more vulnerable. "Because 3 years ago, I rode into this town expecting to stay a few weeks, maybe a month. I've been here longer than I've been anywhere since the war. You want to know why? Sarah found herself holding her breath. Because for the first time in 15 years, I found a reason to stop running. I found someone who made me want to be better than what I was. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they dared cross. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the careful control she'd maintained for so long. Jack! She began, but he held up a hand. I'm not asking you to stay for me, Sarah. I'm asking you to stay for yourself. This town, these people, they've become your people, whether you want to admit it or not. Old Mrs. Chen still brings her herbs to you when her arthritis flares up because she trusts your grandmother's medicine more than anything the doctor can provide. The Ramirez children run to you when they scrape their knees because you always have the right words to make the hurt go away. Hell, even Judge Parker asks your advice when he's dealing with disputes between the ranchers and the reservation. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. You don't understand. I'm tired of being caught between worlds. Tired of being too Indian for the whites and too white for the Indians. At the reservation, maybe I can remember who I was before all of this. Who you were. Jack stepped closer, his voice gentle but insistent. Sarah, you are who you are because of all of this. The woman who can speak 5 languages, who can deliver a baby and negotiate a peace treaty in the same day, who can track a wounded animal through terrain that would kill most men, that woman wasn't diminished by living in both worlds. She was made stronger by it. A sound from the street made them both turn. A group of riders was approaching, their horses' hooves raising dust clouds in the dim light. As they drew closer, Sarah recognized the distinctive dress and bearing of Apache warriors, though these men wore a mixture of traditional and modern clothing that marked them as reservation police. The lead rider dismounted and approached the porch. Sarah recognized him immediately, Joseph Crowfeather, her second cousin, who had taken the position of tribal policeman after returning from the Carlisle school. Sarah Running Wolf, he said formally in Apache, then switched to English. I bring word from the chief. You are expected to return with us tomorrow as ordered. I understand, Joseph. Sarah's response was equally formal. I will be ready. Joseph's stern expression softened slightly as he looked at her. It has been many years, cousin. The people wonder if you remember the old ways. I remember, Sarah said quietly. The question is whether the old ways remember me. Joseph nodded slowly, then glanced at Jack with barely concealed suspicion. You would do well to make your farewells tonight. Tomorrow we leave at dawn. After the Apache riders had made camp at the edge of town, Jack and Sarah found themselves walking the familiar streets of Redemption Creek. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and the distant smoke from cookfires. 20 years, Sarah said as they passed the small schoolhouse where she had learned to read and write English. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, sometimes like yesterday. Tell me about when you first came here, Jack said. Sarah was quiet for so long that Jack thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, as if she was seeing events from long ago. I was 23 and 8 months pregnant. My husband had been killed in the final skirmishes with the cavalry, and I knew the soldiers were coming for the rest of us. My grandmother gave me her medicine bundle and told me to take it to the white settlements, to find a way to survive until the hatred died down. They stopped in front of the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. Sarah walked to a weathered wooden cross near the back, and Jack followed silently. James Running Wolf Henderson, she read from the marker. Born 1872, died 1873. 10 months old when the smallpox took him. Jack felt something tighten in his chest as he realized what she was showing him. Tom's namesake? Tom delivered him. Sat up 3 nights straight when the fever came, trying everything he could think of. When it was over, he carved this cross himself. Said every child deserved to be remembered. That's why you can't leave, Jack said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. It's not about the living. It's about the dead. Sarah's composure finally cracked, and tears began to flow down her cheeks. How can I leave him here alone? He never knew his father, never knew his people. This ground, these strangers who became family, it's all he ever knew. Jack moved closer, not quite touching but near enough that she could feel his warmth. Sarah, listen to me. Your son isn't alone here. He's surrounded by people who loved him, who still remember him. And, you carrying guilt about his death, that's not honoring his memory, that's just torturing yourself. I should have taken him to the reservation. The medicine men might have been able to save him. You did what any mother would do. You got him the best help available. The fact that it wasn't enough doesn't make it the wrong choice. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears and, something else, a desperate hope that she was afraid to acknowledge. What if I stay and nothing changes? What if I'm still caught between worlds, still never quite belonging anywhere? Jack reached out and gently touched her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. Then, at least you'll be caught between worlds with people who care about you. Sarah, home isn't a place you find. It's a place you make. And, you've made one here, whether you realize it or not. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility and fear in equal measure. Sarah found herself leaning into his touch, allowing herself for the first time to truly consider what it might mean to stay. Jack, I need to tell you something. Her voice was barely a whisper. 3 years ago, when you first came to town, I was planning to leave then, too. I decided I couldn't keep living in between anymore. But, then, you started coming around, and, for the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to something. What changed your mind? About leaving, I mean? I realized I was afraid. Not of leaving, but of staying and letting myself care about someone again. It was easier to convince myself I didn't belong here than to risk losing someone else I loved. The admission hung between them like a bridge finally completed. Jack's hand was still on her face, and Sarah could feel the slight tremor in his fingers. Sarah, I need you to know something. The man I was before I came here, that man would have ridden out of town the moment he realized he was falling in love. But, you've made me want to be better than that. You've made me want to be the kind of man who stays. The word love seemed to echo in the evening air. Sarah felt her carefully constructed walls finally crumble completely. I'm scared, Jack. I've lost everyone I've ever loved. My husband, my child, my grandmother who died while I was here. What if we have 20 years together? What if we have 50? What if we build something real and strong and lasting? Jack's voice was steady, certain. Sarah, life doesn't come with guarantees. The only guarantee is that if we don't try, we'll definitely lose. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settling over her like a blanket. When she opened them again, her gaze was clear and determined. Joseph and the others will expect me to leave with them tomorrow. Then, we'll tell them you're not going. It's not that simple. The government order can be challenged. Judge Parker's been fighting federal overreach for years. If anyone can find a legal way around it, he can. Sarah felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. You've thought this through. I've been thinking about it since the day you told Tom you were leaving. Sarah, I've spent 15 years running from who I was. I don't want to spend the next 15 years running from who I could be with you. As they walked back toward the trading post, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope. Not the desperate hope of survival that had sustained her through the darkest times, but the quiet, steady hope of possibility. The trading post was dark except for the lamp burning in the window, Tom's signal that they were welcome back. As they approached the porch, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the window glass, a woman caught between worlds, yes, but a woman who had made those worlds larger by her presence in them. Jack, there's something else you need to understand. If I stay, if we do this, it won't be easy. There will be people who disapprove, who think we don't belong together. Let them talk. I've been on the wrong side of public opinion before. I can handle it if you can. And there will be times when I struggle with who I am, when the pull of my people's ways conflicts with the life we're trying to build. Then, we'll work through it together. Sarah, I'm not asking you to choose between being Apache and being part of this community. I'm asking you to trust that you can be both. They reached the porch, and Sarah turned to face the direction of the Apache camp. She could see the glow of their fire in the distance, and she thought about Joseph's words. The people wondered if she remembered the old ways. My grandmother used to tell me that the strongest trees are the ones that bend with the wind rather than breaking against it, she said quietly. I think I've been so afraid of bending that I forgot how strong flexible things can be. Jack followed her gaze toward the camp. What will you tell them? The truth. That I've found my place, and it's here. That the old ways don't have to die just because we adapt them to new circumstances. That maybe being a bridge between worlds is exactly what my people need right now. The next morning, the entire town seemed to hold its breath as Sarah walked toward the Apache camp. Word had spread quickly through Redemption Creek's small population, and people gathered in doorways and windows to watch the confrontation that would determine whether they would lose one of their most valued citizens. Joseph Crowfeather stood waiting beside his horse, his expression unreadable. The other tribal policemen flanked him, their eyes hard with the authority of federal law. Sarah Running Wolf, Joseph said formally as she approached. It is time. No, Joseph. It is not. The simple words carried across the morning air with quiet authority. Joseph's eyes narrowed. The federal agent was clear. All Apache must return to the reservation. You cannot simply decide to ignore the law. I'm not ignoring anything, Sarah replied, her voice steady. I'm challenging it. Judge Parker is filing an appeal based on my legal status as a property owner and business partner in this community. Until that appeal is resolved, I have the right to remain. It was a calculated risk. Sarah knew that federal authority ultimately trumped local law, but she was counting on bureaucratic delays and Joseph's own reluctance to force the issue. Joseph was silent for a long moment, studying her face. When he finally spoke, it was in Apache, too quietly for the watching townspeople to hear. Cousin, they say you have forgotten who you are. That the white world has stolen your spirit. Sarah replied in the same language, her voice carrying the cadences she had learned at her grandmother's knee. Tell them that my spirit burns as bright as it ever did. Tell them that I carry our grandmother's medicine bundle still, that I speak her words to children who have never known our homeland. Tell them that being Apache doesn't mean living in only one place or only one way. Joseph's stern expression began to crack slightly. And what of your duty to your people? My duty is to survive, to preserve what can be preserved, and to build bridges that might allow our children to walk in both worlds without shame. I cannot do that from the reservation. The conversation continued in Apache for several more minutes, with Sarah's voice growing more passionate and Joseph's responses becoming more thoughtful. Finally, Joseph stepped back and surveyed the watching townspeople, his gaze lingering on Jack Morrison, who stood on the trading post porch. The federal agent will not be pleased, Joseph said, switching back to English. Then, we'll deal with his displeasure when it comes, Judge Parker's voice carried across the square as the elderly jurist approached, legal documents in hand. Miss Running Wolf's appeal has been filed with the territorial court. Until it's resolved, she has every legal right to remain here. Joseph looked from the judge to Sarah to the growing crowd of townspeople who had come to support her. His fellow tribal policemen were shifting uncomfortably, clearly uncertain about forcing the issue in the face of organized legal resistance. This will bring trouble, Joseph warned. Trouble is not new to any of us, Sarah replied. But sometimes the right kind of trouble is worth facing. Joseph mounted his horse and gathered his reins. I will report that you refuse to comply and that local authorities are interfering with federal orders. What happens next is not in my hands. As the Apache riders departed, the townspeople began to disperse, but not before several approached Sarah to offer their support. Mrs. Chen pressed a small bag of herbs into her hands. The Ramirez children hugged her legs. Judge Parker shook her hand formally and promised to fight the federal order with every legal tool available. Through it all, Jack remained on the porch, watching but not presuming to interfere. When the crowd finally thinned, Sarah walked back to him. Well, she said, I suppose I'm staying. Any regrets? Sarah looked around the town square, at the buildings that had sheltered her for 20 years, at the people who had become her chosen family. Ask me again in 50 years. Jack smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. I intend to. Over the following weeks, as Judge Parker's legal maneuvering delayed federal response and gave Sarah's case time to build support, something interesting happened in Redemption Creek. The conflict had forced the community to examine what it meant to belong, what it meant to be home. Mrs. Chen, the elderly Chinese woman who ran the laundry, spoke publicly for the first time about her own struggles to find acceptance in a town that had initially viewed her with suspicion. The Ramirez family, Mexican settlers who had arrived 5 years earlier, shared their own stories of feeling caught between cultures. What emerged was a recognition that Redemption Creek had become something rare in the American West, a place where people from different backgrounds had learned to see their differences as strengths rather than threats. Seems to me, Tom Henderson observed one evening as he and Sarah tallied the day's receipts, that this whole business has reminded people why they chose to stay here in the first place. Sarah smiled, thinking of Jack's words about making a home rather than finding one. Maybe that's the real lesson. Not that we have to choose between worlds, but that we can help create a world big enough for all of us. The federal response, when it finally came, was predictably bureaucratic and heavy-handed. A new federal agent arrived with orders to resolve the running wolf situation once and for all. Agent Harrison was a thin, officious man who clearly viewed his assignment to the Arizona Territory as punishment for some career misstep. Miss Running Wolf, he announced at the trading post, flanked by 2 federal marshals, you will comply with the removal order immediately, or you will be arrested for violation of federal law. Agent Harrison, Judge Parker interjected, appearing as if summoned, I trust you've reviewed the legal brief I filed with the territorial court? Local courts have no jurisdiction over federal Indian policy, Harrison replied dismissively. Perhaps not, but they do have jurisdiction over property rights and business partnerships. Miss Running Wolf owns a quarter share of this trading post and has legal contracts with 17 local families. Removing her would constitute unlawful seizure of property and breach of contract. Harrison's face reddened. The law is clear, the law is complex, Judge Parker continued smoothly, which is why it requires interpretation by qualified legal minds. I suggest you contact your superiors before taking any precipitous action that might result in expensive litigation. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but it was interrupted by an unexpected arrival. A small group of Apache elders had ridden in from the reservation, led by a man Sarah recognized with shock, her uncle, Thomas Crowkiller, who had been a prominent war chief before the surrender. Uncle, Sarah breathed, switching instinctively to Apache as the elderly man dismounted slowly from his horse. Thomas Crowkiller studied her face for a long moment before speaking. I have come to hear the truth with my own ears, granddaughter. They say you have abandoned your people. Agent Harrison stepped forward officiously. This woman is in violation of federal law. She must return to the reservation immediately. Thomas Crowkiller turned to look at the federal agent with the kind of cold assessment that had once struck fear into cavalry officers. And who are you to speak of what my granddaughter must do? I am the federal agent responsible for Indian affairs in this territory. All Apache are required to live on the reservation. All Apache? The old man's voice carried dangerous quiet. And who decides who is Apache? You? Harrison seemed to realize he was on uncertain ground, but pressed forward anyway. Federal law is clear about tribal membership and residence requirements. Thomas Crowkiller turned back to Sarah and spoke in Apache, his voice carrying the formal cadences of tribal council. Tell me, granddaughter, have you forgotten the 4 directions? Have you forgotten the prayers your grandmother taught you? Have you forgotten that we are the people who live between the earth and sky? Sarah straightened, feeling the weight of tradition and expectation, but also the strength she had found in 20 years of survival and adaptation. She replied in Apache, her voice steady and clear. Uncle, I remember all of these things. But I also remember that our people have always adapted to survive. I remember that strength comes not from clinging to what was, but from carrying what matters into what must be. The old man nodded slowly. And what must be, granddaughter? A world where our children can walk proud in both worlds. Where the medicine songs are not forgotten, but where they are sung in new places for new challenges. Where being Apache is not about where we live, but how we live. Thomas Crow Killer was silent for a long moment, studying not just Sarah but the assembled townspeople, many of whom were watching the exchange with respectful attention despite not understanding the words. "I see that you have not abandoned your people," he said finally, switching to English so all could hear. "You have found a way to serve them differently." Agent Harrison spluttered. "This woman is in violation." "This woman," Thomas Crow Killer interrupted, "is under the protection of her clan. As are her choices." He turned to address Judge Parker directly. "What legal standing does this give her in your white man's courts?" Judge Parker smiled, recognizing the opening he needed. "Tribal sovereignty gives her the right to appeal through tribal courts. If her own people support her decision to remain here, federal law becomes considerably more flexible." Over the next several hours, something remarkable happened in the trading post. What began as a legal and cultural confrontation transformed into something more like a negotiation between allies. Thomas Crow Killer and the other elders listened as townspeople spoke about Sarah's role in their community, her contributions as a healer, mediator, and bridge between cultures. Mrs. Chin spoke haltingly about how Sarah had delivered her grandson when the doctor was away. The Ramirez father described how Sarah had negotiated with hostile ranchers to secure water rights for his family's small farm. Tom Henderson produced a ledger showing how Sarah's partnership had transformed a failing trading post into the economic heart of the community. Most surprising was when Jack Morrison spoke, addressing the Apache elders with obvious respect but unwavering conviction. "I know I have no standing to speak about your family matters," he began, "but I want you to know something about Sarah that maybe you haven't heard. She hasn't forgotten your ways, she's been teaching them. Every child in this town knows how to read weather signs because of her. The women know which plants can heal and which can harm. The men have learned to track and hunt in ways their fathers never taught them." He paused, looking directly at Thomas Crow Killer. "I've heard her sing the old songs to children who were hurt or afraid. I've watched her perform ceremonies for the dead that brought comfort to families who had never seen such things. She hasn't abandoned your culture, she's been spreading it, making it stronger by sharing its wisdom." Thomas Crow Killer studied Jack with new interest. "And what is your place in this, white man?" "I'm someone who learned too late in life that running from who you are doesn't make you stronger, it makes you smaller. Sarah has taught me that real strength comes from standing where you are and fighting to make that place better." The old Apache chief was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, it was with the weight of decision. "Agent Harrison," he said formally, "I speak for the tribal council when I say that Sarah Running Wolf has our permission to remain here as our representative to the white community. She will serve as a bridge between our peoples and will report regularly on matters affecting both communities." Harrison looked as if he had swallowed something unpleasant. "I'll need to confirm this with my superiors." "You do that," Judge Parker said cheerfully. "In the meantime, Miss Running Wolf will remain here under the protection of both tribal sovereignty and territorial law." That evening, as the Apache elders prepared to return to the reservation and Agent Harrison retreated to compose what would undoubtedly be a confused and frustrated report to his superiors, Sarah found herself once again on the trading post porch with Jack. "So," Jack said, "it appears you're staying after all." "It appears I am." Sarah smiled, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. "My uncle wants me to visit the reservation regularly, to maintain ties with the people and to bring back information about conditions here. Judge Parker thinks we can formalize my position as an official liaison." "And what do you want?" Sarah considered the question, looking out over the town that had become her home, thinking about the conversation that had changed everything. "I want to build something that lasts. I want to help create a place where my grandson, if I'm blessed to have one someday, can grow up proud of all his ancestors, not ashamed of any of them." Jack moved closer, his hand finding hers in the gathering dusk. "That sounds like a worthy goal for a lifetime. Jack, there's something I need to know. You said you'd been running for 15 years before you came here. What made you finally stop?" Jack was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Honestly? It was watching you that first week I was here. I saw a woman who had every reason to be bitter, every reason to give up, and, instead she was helping deliver a baby one day and negotiating a peace treaty the next. I realized that all my running hadn't made me stronger, it had just made me tired. And, now I wake up every morning grateful for the chance to be part of something bigger than my own fear. He turned to face her fully. Sarah, I know we've been dancing around this for 3 years, and I know the timing might not be perfect, but I need to ask you something. Sarah felt her heart begin to race, sensing what was coming. I don't have much to offer. No family name, no inherited wealth, no promises that life will be easy. But I can promise that whatever comes, you won't face it alone. I can promise that I'll fight for this place we've found together, and I'll fight for the future we might build. He paused, reaching into his vest pocket to produce a simple silver ring set with a piece of polished turquoise. Sarah Running Wolf, will you marry me? The proposal hung in the evening air like a song waiting to be completed. Sarah looked at the ring, then at Jack's face, and, finally, out at the town spread below them. You know what my grandmother used to say about turquoise? She asked softly. No, what? She said it was the stone that connected earth and sky, that had helped its wearer see the truth in all things. Sarah held out her hand, and Jack slipped the ring onto her finger. It fits perfectly. Is that a yes? That's a yes. Sarah smiled, feeling tears of joy prick at her eyes. But I have conditions. Jack laughed. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. What are they? First, we have a Apache ceremony as well as a white one. I want both our traditions represented. Agreed. Second, any children we have will know both their heritages. They'll learn English and Apache, white customs and Indian ones. Wouldn't have it any other way. Third, we build a house big enough for all the strays and lost souls who are going to keep showing up here, because this place seems to attract people who need a second chance. Jack pulled her closer, his eyes bright with laughter and love. Sarah, I'm planning on being one of those strays for the rest of my life. I think I can handle a few more. As they kissed, the sun set completely over Redemption Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, they could hear the sound of children playing, the lowing of cattle, and the evening songs of birds settling for the night, all the ordinary sounds of a community at peace with itself. 6 months later, Sarah Running Wolf and Jack Morrison were married in a ceremony that combined traditions from both their worlds. Thomas Crow Killer performed the Apache rituals, while Judge Parker handled the legal formalities. The entire town attended, along with a delegation from the reservation that included Joseph Crow Feather, who had become an unlikely ally in Sarah's efforts to build bridges between communities. The wedding feast featured both traditional Apache foods and the hearty fare favored by the cowboys and settlers. Children of various backgrounds played together in the dusty streets, their laughter creating a soundtrack of hope for the future. As the celebration continued into the evening, Sarah found a quiet moment to visit her son's grave. She knelt beside the weathered cross and spoke softly in Apache, telling James about the man she had married and the life they planned to build. You would have liked him, little one, she whispered. He has gentle hands and a good heart. And he understands that love isn't about forgetting the past, it's about carrying the best of it forward. Jack found her there as the moon rose, and together they walked back toward the lights of the trading post, where their friends and family were still celebrating. Any regrets? Jack asked, echoing her question from months before. Sarah looked around at the scene, her Apache relatives sharing stories with cowpunchers, Mrs. Chen teaching Judge Parker to use chopsticks, the Ramirez children playing with reservation kids who would return home tomorrow with tales of the wedding feast. None at all, she said firmly. This is exactly where I belong. Years passed, and the story of Sarah Running Wolf became part of Redemption Creek's folklore. The town grew slowly but steadily, attracting families who were drawn by its reputation for tolerance and opportunity. Sarah's role as liaison between the reservation and the settlement evolved into something approaching diplomacy, as tensions between white settlers and Apache communities eased through her patient mediation. The house Jack and Sarah built on the hill overlooking town became exactly what she had envisioned, a refuge for those who needed a second chance. They took in orphan children, sheltered families fleeing persecution, and provided a safe haven for anyone who needed to heal from the wounds life had inflicted. Their own children came in time, 3 sons who grew up bilingual and bicultural, equally comfortable in the saddle and in the ceremonial circle, able to navigate both worlds with the confident ease their mother had fought so hard to achieve. But perhaps the most lasting change was in the story the town told about itself. Redemption Creek became known throughout the territory as a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where strength came from unity rather than uniformity. Sarah never did forget the old ways. She kept her grandmother's medicine bundle, taught the ancient songs to a new generation, and ensured that the wisdom of her people survived and flourished in new soil. But she also embraced the new ways, adapting and growing and finding strength in change. And Jack Morrison, the man who had spent 15 years running from his past, finally learned that the only way to truly escape who you had been was to become someone better. In choosing to stay, in choosing to fight for something larger than himself, he discovered that redemption was not a place you found but a life you built, one choice at a time. The Apache woman who had declared it her final night had instead found her first morning, and, in doing so, had shown an entire community that the strongest roots grow not from avoiding the storm, but from learning to bend without breaking, to adapt without surrendering, and to honor the past while embracing the future. In the end, Sarah Running Wolf's greatest victory was not in choosing between worlds, but in proving that a person could be fully themselves while helping others do the same. Her story became a testament to the truth her grandmother had known all along, that the strongest trees are indeed those that bend with the wind, and that home is not a place you return to, but a place you create through love, courage, and the willingness to stand firm in the face of uncertainty. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, and, in choosing strength over fear, love over loneliness, and hope over despair, both Sarah and Jack had found the kind of victory that echoes through generations. Their legacy lived on not just in their children, but in the community they had helped build, a place where anyone could find redemption if they had the courage to stay and fight for it. As the years passed and Redemption Creek grew into a small city, visitors would sometimes ask longtime residents about the origins of the town's unusually tolerant character. The answers they received always included the same elements: the story of an Apache woman who almost left and a cowboy who convinced her to stay, and how their choice to build a life together had shown an entire community that strength comes not from standing alone, but from standing together. And, on summer evenings, when the wind carries the sound of children's laughter through the streets and the setting sun paints the sky in shades of gold and crimson, old-timers will tell you that if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echo of ancient songs blending with new voices, still see the shadow of a woman who learned that home is not a place you find, but a place you make, one choice, one relationship, one act of courage at a time. The story of Sarah Running Wolf and Jack Morrison became more than just a love story. It became a blueprint for how communities can grow stronger by embracing rather than fearing their differences, and how individuals can find redemption not by running from their past, but by using the lessons of that past to build something better for the future. In the end, the Apache woman's final night became the first night of a new beginning, not just for herself, but for everyone whose lives she touched. And the cowboy who couldn't let her leave discovered that sometimes the greatest act of love is not in holding on, but in helping someone find the courage to stay and fight for what matters most.